Shalom! Baruch Hashem Adonai Eloheinu, Elohim Yevarechotka. How many speak Hebrew here today? Well, I'll tell you, next year we're in March, we're going to be going to Israel. So I'm going to teach you some words on our trip in Israel. So we'd love to have you there. My name is Gene Dalesh, and my wife Judy. We're going to be leading the trip to Israel next year in March. And we've got a great group of people here. Amanda and Bruce are going to be telling you all about the trip to Israel. So we're glad you made it here today. You're going to learn a lot about Israel. Some of you might have gone, maybe you have never gone, but we want to invite you to come next year on that trip. So we're just giving more information today. And this is the shofar. The shofar is the Hebrew name for trumpet. So you remember when Joshua sounded the ram's horns around the walls of Jericho? How many remember singing that little song, and the walls came tumbling down? Well, that's what he used, a horn, shofar. These are sacred instruments used by the Jewish people today in Israel. The shofar is the sound of the trumpet, and these come from African antelopes. Now, the ram's horn comes from you remember when Abraham offered Isaac? God, instead of taking the son of Abraham, God actually provided a ram. And so the ram is the shofar. This is an antelope horn. Now, I'm going to tell you really quickly that the Jewish people will sound the shofar for special events. When I go into speaking events, I tell about the tabernacle, I tell about the different calls on the shofar. This comes, as I mentioned, from the African antelope. So we're going to, there's three calls. There's the tekiah, teruah, shevarim. Can you say that with me in Hebrew? Tekiah, teruah, shevarim. You're already talking good Hebrew. Okay, very good. You're going to learn more if you go to Israel next year. Now I'm going to give you the sound of the shofar. Well, let's start with the sounding of the shofar. To Jerusalem with the sounding of the trumpet. And I can't wait for that day. So I tell people, even if you can't go to Israel on this trip, if you're a child of God, you're going to come back hearing the sound of the shofar and seeing our Lord. Well, we've got a great lineup for you today. And so we're so thankful for each and every one of you to come to this event today. And I'm going to go ahead and present Amanda. She worked with the Roseborough Travel Agency. She's going to give you some information, and then she'll be turning it over to Bruce here, who tells us a lot about the trip to Israel.
Thank
Amanda.
you. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. On behalf of Roseborough Travel, we would just like to welcome you and thank you for joining us. Kathy, come on up. Kathy is my business partner at Roseborough Travel, and Tiffany also, but Tiffany's not here today. She's holding down the fort at the office. So just on behalf of Roseborough Travel, we would like to thank you for joining us at this event. And we wanted to tell you to go ahead and take a look at your flyer. Bruce will be coming up in just a moment, but this flyer right here is something we put together for you because Gene and Judy Dalesh have really put together an amazing itinerary for people to go to Israel for their first time or their 100th time. And Bruce is going to go through and walk through the footsteps with you of this itinerary. So without further ado, Kathy and I are going to go ahead and welcome up Bruce, and he's going to tell you a little bit about the amazing itinerary that you will be taking if you decide to go on this trip, or that you can take, or that Gene and Judy will be taking in March of next year. So go ahead, come on up, Bruce.
Yeah. So good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Gene said, now make sure they can hear you. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
It's great to be here today, that's for sure. You know, I'll tell you one thing I love about Hebrew is the word shalom means two things, hello and goodbye. Right? It's like going to Italy. Ciao means hello, ciao means goodbye. You go to Hawaii, aloha means hello, means goodbye. Come to Israel, shalom means hello and goodbye. Funny enough, and I will say, everything he said in Hebrew, good for him, I couldn't say that. I get the opportunity about 3 or 4 times a year to work with the owner of this company. He's a 7th generation Israeli, Boaz Shelgi. There's a biblical name for us. Boaz, right? Boaz comes into Florida 3 or 4 times a year. We spend the week together. We drive around all over the state, seeing churches, talking to groups, getting them introduced to the trip that they're about to go on with us later on. But as we're driving around, what's he doing? He's on the cell phone, talking to all the folks back home, right, in Hebrew. I have no idea anything that he said. However, I've learned one word in Hebrew in all of our driving around the state. Whenever I heard the word Ken, because he kept saying, he'd be chatting and chatting and chatting, and he'd say Ken, 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 Ken. And I'm thinking, why does he keep saying this guy's name Ken? What I finally figured out was the word Ken, and you can use this when you go with us in March, the word Ken means yes. So there you go. There's the only important Jewish Hebrew name that you'll need to know. When you hear the word Ken, it means yes. So there you are. But funny enough, when you go, one of the many, many fascinating features of this country, this trip, this destination, is that you will see, from the moment you arrive until the day you leave, it's an English-speaking country, very friendly, very safe, very warm and welcoming to the Americans and to the Westerners and to the tourists. 70,000 tourists a month, per month, travel through Israel year in and year out. 70,000 a month. That's a lot of travelers visiting this country. So despite all we may see on the television, and granted some of that does scare us, 70,000 people a month want to come to Israel. I've been in the travel industry for 35 years, and I've really had this great opportunity to see many great destinations around the world. Africa, Italy, the Caribbean, all kinds of great places. What was really striking about Israel to me, personally, was while those may be great and beautiful vacations, Israel and the Holy Land is something much more than that. The folks that are traveling with us, going on tour with us through Israel to see and experience the Holy Land, this is not just a vacation. This is not something to do next year. This is something they must do. This is important to them. This is the journey of a lifetime for those folks that experience Israel with us. And I don't think there's anywhere else in the world, no other destination, that can claim that. Because when you're traveling with us in Israel, you're there for a reason. You want to see and experience the Holy Land. You want to walk in the footsteps of Jesus, right? That's why we're there. You will get that opportunity for the next 10 days that you're in Israel with us, guaranteed. We meaning the company, EDI Travel, which is based in Upper Galilee, so they're an Israeli tour company, so this is their business. They've done this for 30 years. We do about 50 church groups a year. 50. It's a lot of church groups who want to come and see Israel, all there for the same reason. They want to bring the Bible to life, and it will do that. So what I'm about to do today is just kind of quickly walk you through this trip that Amanda and Gene and his wife are gracious enough to have planned with us for March of 2018. Keep in mind, if you're thinking about going, March of 2018 is right around the corner. So while we may say it's next year, it's 7 months. So just kind of keep that in mind that, we're getting closer. It's time to start making those plans and making the reservations and getting booked and going with us. So, have any of us in the audience, besides Gene and his wife, have any of us in the audience been to Israel before? Just to kind of hands up if you've been. So, a couple of folks, did you enjoy your trip?
Yes.
Did you enjoy it? Did you, young lady, did you enjoy your trip to Israel? Did you? Did you enjoy? Did you have fun? Did you enjoy your trip?
I've been to Jerusalem.
You enjoyed it?
Love it.
There we go. That's my mom, so of course she's going to, no, I'm just kidding.
I go back.
There we go. And I'll tell you, and just kind of follow up on that. I've done this many times. What's the biggest challenge that I as a sales rep or Israel as a country faces as we try to talk to folks about coming to Israel to go on a tour? The number one question, the number one concern is safety. We'd love to see it, we'd love to go, we want to do this, but That's what we're nervous about. What's interesting is, ask anyone that's been, ask any of the other folks that have been, what is their answer every time? We loved it, we felt safe, and we'd go back in a heartbeat. And we should have done this a long time ago. That's very telling. So what you're going to see is a wonderful country, very warm and welcoming toward the travelers that are going with us, but you will get this opportunity to walk in the footsteps of Jesus, and that's quite an experience. So, on that note, as mentioned, EDI Travel, these folks have done this for 30 years. This is their business. This is what they specialize in. This is actually the owner of the company. He's a bit older now. He's got a beard, but Bo Shogi, the owner of the company, he actually bought the business from his mom, who started the company 30 years ago. He bought it from his mom 20 years ago. So they've been doing this for many, many years. Although Jewish, 90% of their business is Christian tour groups. So we really welcome and embrace the Christian family to join us and visit this great country. What will happen on your tour is, and you kind of see it in the flyer, as you eventually, should you decide to go with us, then we, of course, the next step will then be, we'll provide you with a kind of a day-by-day, minute-by-minute description of your tour. The flyer that you're seeing is really just meant to kind of paint the big picture, right? Give you an idea of what we're up to. My goal today is to kind of take the next step and walk you through this trip each day to kind of give you some ideas of what you'll be seeing and what you'll be doing and where you're going to go and what your experience is going to be like. You're going to fly from the United States, in this case Orlando. You're going to fly from Orlando to Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv itself is just a beautiful, modern, Western, English-speaking, gorgeous city. Beautiful city, right on the Mediterranean Sea. So what an interesting place to start your trip, because you're beginning in what appears to be a very modern, big Western city, and the next day you're standing in the middle of a 2,000-year-old temple or palace built by King Herod. What an experience. So you start out by flying to Tel Aviv, your trip begins there, we pick you up at the airport, and you then go on tour. What you're about to do is, as you travel through Israel, now keep in mind Israel, as a country, is about the size of New Jersey. So it's not a big country, right? So we can easily do this trip by bus. And what you're about to do is, when we pick you up in Tel Aviv, we're going to drive north, hour and a half. We're going to drive north to northern Israel, where we're now going to spend the next 4 days or so in northern Israel, right? We typically stay, we'll see a picture in a minute, but we typically stay in a city called Tiberias. Tiberias, of course, named after one of Rome's many emperors, the city of Tiberias. Why do we stay in Tiberias? Why are we in northern Israel? Because for the next 3 or 4 days, this is where you're really going to kind of start this journey of walking in the footsteps of Jesus. Because as we know, right, Jesus spent the first 3 years of his ministry in northern Israel. So northern Israel is a very important place to start the tour, because that includes the Sea of Galilee. It includes Cana, right, the site of the first miracle. It includes the Mount of Beatitudes. It includes the city of Capernaum, which we'll see pictures of in just a minute. This is a very important way to start the trip, because this is where Jesus' story starts, quite frankly. We'll see the city of Nazareth, which is truly where the story begins, right? We then work our way down to Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem, which is actually in the middle of the country. Because now we're going to stay in Jerusalem for a few days, because Jerusalem will now be our hub to see Jerusalem itself, very important. Bethlehem, which is 20 minutes away. Masada, Qumran, where they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. Very important sites surround Jerusalem. So 4 days up north, 4 days in Jerusalem. It's a very small country, easy to get around. We do each of our days touring by bus. It's not a get up every morning and pack your bags and move to another hotel. We have 2 hotels. One up north for 4 days and one in the middle for 4 days. It's very simple. So you get up after breakfast, you have a nice American breakfast at the hotel, go out for the day, come back and enjoy the evening at the hotel. So anyway, so your trip then is going to start after Tel Aviv. We're going to drive a little bit north and start by, to me, what was just fascinating because I'd never been. I had no idea what to expect Israel to be or any of these cities that I'm about to see. Caesarea, which is usually one of our very first stops in the trip, Caesarea was magnificent because Caesarea is the home of one of four of King Herod's palaces. King Herod, at the time of Jesus, right, built four magnificent palaces. Caesarea, which we're going to see, Herodium, which is eventually, recently, within the past 20 years, where they discovered King Herod's burial site to be, at the palace of Herodium. Masada, which we'll see in a few minutes, right? The top of the mountain, my all-time favorite palace to see that week. And then, of course, the palace that was built inside Jerusalem itself. So King Herod, responsible for four magnificent palaces, one of them being Caesarea. Caesarea on the Mediterranean Sea, beautiful, magnificent. What we do, and this picture was actually taken, I was standing in my wife took these pictures, but nevertheless I'll claim it. We were standing in the middle of what was left of King Herod's palace, knowing that above us, and 2,000 years ago, was this magnificent three-story palace, and we're standing in his palace. What a place. What a great thing to see. Because from his palace, what do we see off to the right? The amphitheater where they would have done the gladiator games, right? The horse racing, the gladiator games, the chariots, all taking place right there at the Hippodrome. Back in the back, that castle that we see back there was built 1,200 years later by the Knights Templar. 1,200 years later. You can't see it in this picture, but standing here looking toward the Mediterranean Sea, between us and the Mediterranean Sea was a magnificent, huge swimming pool that, of course, King Herod had built as part of his palace. Magnificent. Caesarea had also played a bit of a role in Christian history as well, because this is the site of where Paul was imprisoned for those 2 years before he was sent to Rome. And you actually see the cave. And funny enough, I think a lot of us, when we picture the word imprison, 2,000 years ago, imprison generally meant inside some cave. And this is no exception. So you'll see where Paul was imprisoned, and certainly not a place that any of us would want to be. But you're also going to see, for example, at Caesarea, the amphitheater, the beautiful amphitheater that still is in existence and still operational, built 2,000 years ago by King Herod and his workers. This is a magnificent structure. A lot of our church groups that go with us, and we might want to get Gene up on stage that day, in fact. Make a note of this, Amanda, because this is something I think we'd want to have Gene do. A lot of our churches, a lot of our folks, our choral groups, folks that play the shofar, we can get them up on stage, on King Herod's stage, right there, and sing and play their shofar. That's an experience you won't forget. The sound quality 2,000 years later, no speakers are required. It's magnificent. So to see this amphitheater, to experience it, to stand on that stage and sing a song as part of a church congregation, that's a day you won't forget. We then travel up to the city of Megiddo, traveling up a little further north, the city of Megiddo, the second oldest city in the world. But this, of course, Megiddo was the home of the Zebulon tribe, one of the 12 tribes that lived in Israel. This was the home of the Zebulon tribe. So now you're really starting to get back into some of Israel's tremendous history, and of course, which played its part in the Bible itself. As mentioned, we're going to make our way to the city of Tiberias. Tiberias is going to be our home for the next few days. This is the Sea of Galilee in front of us. Behind us, the city of Tiberias. And what a beautiful place. When I went, and we have a few hotels that we use, but when I went, we stayed at that hotel right there. I think that was probably my room, because my view each morning, my wife and I, my view each morning was opening the curtains to our room, and in front of me was the Sea of Galilee. What a way to start the day, right? What a beautiful, inspirational way to start the day. But like I say, we're in Tiberias, we're in northern Israel, for a very specific reason, because this is where we're going to now spend the next few days and go out each day and see the many local important Christian sites, including, of course, the Sea of Galilee. So the Sea of Galilee will be One morning after breakfast, we'll get you on a boat, much like that. Don't worry, it's not 2,000 years old. It's seaworthy and safe. But we're going to get you on a boat like that, and actually there is our group singing and dancing while we're sailing the Sea of Galilee that morning. What another beautiful day. I think that's what this trip turns into, is each day is another inspirational, memorable, important, and often very moving experience for you. This was one of many. We're sailing the Sea of Galilee. We make our way toward the north end of the lake, where we get off the boat and go into a museum, where we actually get a chance to see what they call the Jesus boat. So the Jesus boat. The Jesus boat is something that they discovered actually back in the 70s when the water level of the Sea of Galilee was so low, 25 years ago because of the droughts. They discovered along the shore this boat in the mud. They excavated this boat, tested the wood, and the wood dated back to the 1st century. 1st century, the time of Jesus. So it's called the Jesus boat, not because Jesus was necessarily on it. That we don't know. That we don't know. We can't say he sailed on that boat, but the timing was right, the location was right, and we know Jesus was there at the time. So you go and get the opportunity to see this boat that dates back to the time of Jesus and really kind of get a feel for these boats that they would have used and the experience that Jesus would have had. That's quite a day too. So what you're seeing is that each day, each moment, another powerful moment that's now part of this big vacation. While we're in northern Israel, we're of course going to go see the Mount of Beatitudes. Many of our churches, many of our churches will actually have and will include this in the experience. We'll build this time into their trip. While we're at the Mount of Beatitudes, many of our churches will actually have Mass, have a sermon at the Mount of Beatitudes that day. Beautiful locations. You're right on the Sea of Galilee. What a day. Can you imagine being a pastor, a minister, a priest, a reverend, getting the opportunity to your own congregation give a service at the Mount of Beatitudes? That's something that pastor, minister, priest will never forget, and it's something his congregation will never forget. We're of course going to see go inside it's the Sermon on the Mount took place here, right, where Jesus fed the 5,000. We're going to be in the city of Taba, see the Church of the Multiplication. What's interesting to me, I have to admit, because I guess I kind of assumed a lot that wasn't necessarily accurate, because I'd never been. When I was picturing these places, I'll be the first to admit, what I was kind of imagining I was going to see were churches, for example, that actually dated back to the time of Jesus. I never thought of it, but I just kind of assumed that would be the case. What you discover is most of these churches that we actually eventually see, the Church of the Multiplication, the Church of the Nativity, these churches were built 300 and 400 years after the death of Jesus. So they weren't necessarily there at the time of Jesus, but they're built on holy ground, and that's the reason they're there. That's the reason they're important, because they were built on holy ground. But they weren't necessarily there at the time of Jesus, because most of what we see, just like Caesarea that we saw in the beginning, and much of what we're about to see over the next few minutes, most of that, quite frankly, was destroyed 2,000 years ago, either by earthquakes, by fires, or by Israel's many invaders, right? The Babylonians, the Persians, the Russians, the Romans, all these other countries that at some point ran that country, destroyed much of it. So what you're seeing are, in many cases, churches built 300 and 400 years after the death of Jesus. As mentioned, we're going to go see the city of Cana. This was fascinating. These were two ladies in our group, and as you can see, they are touching the vessel that would have held that water. Once again, I think a lot of us end up being surprised by what we see versus what we think we know. Because most of us, when we're kind of imagining or visualizing the vessel that would have held that water, right, that Jesus was going to turn to wine, I was, and many of us did, what we're kind of visualizing in our minds is a small pitcher, a pitcher of water that would sit on the table. These are the vessels that actually held that water that was turned to wine. So to see it and experience it versus what we thought, very interesting. On my trip, we had a priest with us. He was part of our group. And I have to admit, that was fascinating because here's a man of the cloth, clearly knows and loves the Bible. And to watch this priest experience Israel for himself, to watch him cry as he sees these things, as he touches these important sites, that's very moving. That's very moving, and it's moving for all of us. But to visit Cana, quite a day. We're going to visit the city of Capernaum. Capernaum was the home of St. Peter, right? So St. Peter would have lived in this. This is the ruins of what's left of St. Peter's home. You get a chance to walk through that. Where is it? On the Sea of Galilee. Beautiful. You're going to visit Nazareth, as mentioned, I think, in the story of Jesus. I guess officially this would be where the story really begins, because this, of course, is where Mary is told by the angel Gabriel that she's going to give birth to the Messiah. So when you kind of think of the storyline of Jesus, this is truly where that story begins. And you're about now to walk through Jesus' life for the next 30 years as we take this tour through Israel. While we're in northern Israel, and this day I have to admit was not only fun, but also I had to laugh. Because while we are out this day traveling through northern Israel, you will cross the Jordan River, right? Like the Israelites coming into the Promised Land. What surprised all of us on that bus was I certainly was, we were all kind of expecting the mighty Mississippi, right? Big river, really wide. It's the Jordan River. Well, the Jordan River is about 10 feet wide. It surprised us. So to see it versus what we thought made us laugh. Because here's finally, we're crossing the Jordan River. What we do though, what we do very often, is with many of our groups, and certainly a lot of our church groups, for all of those folks that would like to be baptized in the Jordan River, at the spot where Jesus was baptized by John, they can do it. We do it every week. So that's very popular. If you're interested in going and you'd like to have that done, make sure you let Amanda know, and they'll include that in your trip. Because it's a once in a lifetime. As mentioned, this is what's so unique about Israel. Nowhere else in Israel, but Israel, can you do that. Can you be baptized in the spot that Jesus was baptized at? Nowhere else. So to have that opportunity for you as a traveler, it's a must-see. This is just a picture that was taken that day when we were up in the Golan Heights. The Golan Heights is kind of the mountain range that runs along northern Israel. But it's also the mountain range that borders Syria and Lebanon and Jordan, right? Those are all countries kind of on the other side of the Golan Heights. That day, we were in our bus driving through the Golan Heights, and we would stop at various scenic overlooks along the way, and we could see these other countries. We felt safe at that moment too. This is something that you really start to see real fast. The moment you arrive there's nothing to worry about. You're going to enjoy this trip and feel very safe. And we certainly did there. What was striking to me about northern Israel too, as compared to central Israel, Jerusalem is in the middle of the country. Tiberias is in northern Israel. Geographically, although they're only an hour and a half apart, geographically they are as different as night and day. Because this is a beautiful picture of northern Israel. It's very lush, and this surprised me. Because what I was imagining once again was I was imagining kind of Israel itself, the country, to be very desert-like, which parts of it is. Jerusalem, southern Israel, that's very desert-like, right? However, I had no idea what to picture northern Israel to be. This is northern Israel. It's lush, it's green, it's mountainous, it's full of agriculture, date palms, olive trees, lots of farming, beautiful, just gorgeous. So just to see something that geographically surprised us made for quite a nice few days, because this is exactly, and this is the Jordan Valley, this is exactly what you're going to see as you spend the next 4 days in northern Israel. This will be your scenery. It's gorgeous. We then come down to central Israel, to Jerusalem. So now we're going to stay in Jerusalem for a few days, where you're going to go and see all the surrounding cities, including, of course, Jerusalem itself. Certainly one of my favorites. Right outside Jerusalem is a place called Qumran. Qumran is so important to the story because Qumran is where they discovered just, 60 years ago, back in 1947, not long ago, right? Not 2,000 years ago, 60 years ago. In 1947, they discovered what turned out to be probably one of the world's greatest archaeological discoveries. The first Bible was discovered at Qumran. And the story of how it was found, even more fascinating. Because in 1947, what's happening is, you've got Bedouins living in the area, right? The local tribespeople living, the desert dwellers, the Bedouins, living in the desert. A Bedouin kid, like all kids, what do? They love to go in caves, they love to explore, they love to look for things. A Bedouin kid goes into one of the many caves, and what you're seeing here, when you're at Qumran that day, you're actually going to, there's a cave right there, you're actually going to see about 11 different cave openings. They've discovered 11 in total, where they've ended up finding the Dead Sea Scrolls. But this kid goes into one of these caves in 1947, and what does he find? He finds 4 glass jars, still intact, and still with lids. What does he do? He brings them home. He found them, I'm bringing them home. He and his parents open these jars up, and what's inside is leather parchment, the Dead Sea Scrolls. So the Bedouin family finds these jars, opens them up, looks inside, leather parchment, which is a scroll, is inside these 4 jars. What do they want to do with this leather? They want to take it to a nearby cobbler and have sandals made. Can you imagine if that shoemaker that day in 1947 would have taken that leather parchment, not knowing the difference, and say, yeah, let's make some nice sandals out of that. That discovery turned out to be the first Bible. That discovery turned out to be the Dead Sea Scrolls. Because that shoemaker was wise enough to know there's more to this than this being some leather. So he bought it from them. They got their sandals, thank goodness. But that discovery, he then went to the local university in Jerusalem. The professors and all the necessary people looked at it, historians looked at it and realized what this kid found. This kid found the first Bible in 1947. What a story. So to go to the little village, you can't call it a town. 2,000 years ago, there were 150 priests living in this little village of Qumran, and their job was to keep track of Israel's history. And that's exactly what we ended up seeing in the Dead Sea Scrolls. These 150 priests are kind of memorializing all of this on leather parchment. 2,000 years later, this kid finds it. Turns out to be the first Bible. Wow. Nearby is the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is a lot of fun because it's just a fun couple of hours. It's the Dead Sea. It's almost 1,500 feet below sea level. And when they say salty and you won't sink, you will not sink. It's so salty. I was out there in the Dead Sea. My legs are hanging straight down and I'm just kind of bobbing around. You will not sink. People are laying on the back reading the newspaper. It's the funniest thing you've ever seen. But what people love about the Dead Sea is what you're seeing all these people here. You go and you put this mud on your body. It's like black butter. It's soft and silky and smooth. And you put it all over you and it feels great. And then you go in the water and wash it off and it's just a lot of fun. But it's just a nice couple of hours. But nearby is Masada, right? We actually see the Dead Sea in the background. So even King Herod, 2,000 years ago, he still wanted his water view, right? So in Caesarea, he builds his castle on the Mediterranean Sea. In Masada, he overlooks the Dead Sea. So even 2,000 years ago, they still want their water view. Because what we're about to go see now is King Herod's palace in Masada, which is at the top of the mountain. And I would say, just in general, this was really one of the highlights of the trip for me because it's so big, it's massive. You'll stand in the middle of Masada at the top of this mountain and literally ask yourself, how in the world did they build this? How did they do this? 2,000 years ago, built this massive palace that would have been 3 stories tall on the top of this mountain, 1,500 feet above sea level. And in fact, we even see parts of the palace that came down the side of the mountain. So not just the entire top, right? But even portions of the palace coming down the side. But the story of Masada, also amazing. So we're going to take a cable car. We can see the cable car line right there. We're going to take a cable car from the desert floor, 1,500 feet up to the top of Masada, where you get off the cable car and see this, right? The cable car gets off right there, and you walk around Masada, but you take a cable car to get there. The story of Masada, incredible. So Masada, going back 2,000 years ago, right? What a story. You see that square right there? There's a square there. There's one there. Actually, from Masada, you can only see 2 of the 8 in this picture. But surrounding the mountain are 8 squares. And what those squares actually were 2,000 years ago were campsites of the Roman soldiers. These were the sites, one there, and then 6 more around the mountain. These were the campsites for the Roman soldiers that had surrounded Masada, surrounded the mountain. Because who's in the palace at this moment in time? 960 Jewish rebels have occupied King Herod's palace. King Herod is dead. It's now the year 70 AD. The Romans are in charge of the country. Jesus has been passed away for over 30 years. But who's in Masada? 960 Jewish rebels. And what are the Romans doing? The Romans have taken over the country of Israel. This is one of the last holdouts of the entire Jewish rebellion against the Romans. So the Romans, up to 10,000, they estimate about 10,000 Romans living in these camps, surround the mountain, and are there to take that palace back. Take those folks either hostage and or kill them. These 960 Jewish rebels hold out for 6 months. The Roman soldiers, it takes them 6 months just to build the earth ramp that's going to go up the side of the mountain so they can eventually siege that palace, get inside, capture and or kill the Jewish rebels. 6 months just to build the earth ramp to get them up to the mountain. What we're seeing here is the 10 lots, the 10 names of the final 10 Jewish rebels. Because the story goes simply that instead of being captured, enslaved, or killed by the Romans, which the Jewish were not going to do, they killed themselves. And what we see here is the name of the 10 men, and their job was to take the lives of all of their own family members, men, women, and children, leaving these remaining 10. From these 10, one was then chosen to take the life of the remaining 9 and then turn the knife on himself. All before the Romans could crash through the palace gates and imprison them or kill them. That took place in Masada. 960 Jewish rebels taking their own lives instead of being subjugated to the Romans. They were not going to do it. So to be in Masada, to hear this story, to know what took place, to see these 10 lots, to see those 10 names, to see where the Roman soldiers camped as they planned for this siege, Quite a story. As mentioned, we're in Jerusalem now for about 4 days. This picture was taken standing at the Mount of Olives, the Garden of Gethsemane, near each other, looking across the Kidron Valley. This is the Kidron Valley, into the city of Jerusalem itself, which now is a city of about 1 million people, just in the city. Here, of course, we see the Dome of the Rock, the Muslim temple, but it's also the site of the original first and then second temple. Right? This was the site of the first and second temple. And then 600 years later, the Dome of the Rock built by the Muslims. But we're looking at the Kidron Valley in Jerusalem from the Garden of Gethsemane. Here we see another picture of Jerusalem itself. We see kind of a drawing of what the first and second temples would have looked like. And the history of the temple is fascinating because the first temple goes back 900 years prior to Jesus, right? Built by King Solomon, which was the son of who? King David, right? So King Solomon builds the first temple 900 years BC, so before Christ, long before Jesus. It lasts for about 400 years, and it's destroyed by the Babylonians, who are now in charge of the country. 30 years later, the Persians are now in, and they're in charge of the country. The Persians, however, allow the Jewish people to rebuild the second temple. That's where the second temple came from, the Persians allowing them to do that. That temple lasts until 70 AD, so it lasts about 600 years, when it's eventually destroyed by the Romans. 600 years after that, the Temple of the Rock. So what an incredible history just the first and second temple have. While you're in Jerusalem, you're going to walk through what they call the four quarters, right? The four quarters. The four sections of the city of Jerusalem. And they were fascinating because each one, right? The Armenian section, there's a big Armenian population, the Christian, of course, Jewish, Muslim. Each quarter, each section of the city is very different from the next. The smells, the look, the things you buy, the people you meet. Each section, very different, very interesting. So a lot of fun, a great way to get a better feel for the diversity of this city and all these different factions and people and religions that live inside Jerusalem itself. I would say overall, this day, this experience, walking the 14 stations of Christ, right? Walking the Via Dolorosa, the way of grief. This was, certainly for me, and I think all of us in the group, this was the most moving and powerful day that we experienced the entire trip, and I'll probably ever experience in my life. Because this day, we walked the 14 stations of Christ, starting at station 1, where Jesus is sentenced by Pontius Pilate. And I've always found it kind of interesting that Pontius Pilate was really pushed into that decision to kill Jesus. He didn't necessarily believe Jesus. He knew he may have been a troublemaker, but he never felt that he needed to be killed. But he was pushed in to that decision, and he was. Right? That happens at station 1. To eventually the 14th station, where we see the crucifixion site, the burial site. This is an amazing, very moving few hours, right? Would you agree? We had folks in our group, including the priest, who cried the whole time. Cried the whole time because of what this moment meant to them. For me, and I just use this as my own personal example, for me, funny enough, it was station 4. Because, and I get choked up when I think about it. Because for me, station 4 is where Jesus encounters his own mother Mary. And that had to be powerful. To stand there next to your mother, knowing that you're going to your death, that was a powerful day for me. I mean, as you can see, I get choked up just thinking about that day as I stood at station 4. Because I love my mom, and I can't picture that. So this is a very, very moving experience that you'll have that day. I show this picture of the burial site, not because this was the tomb that Jesus was buried in. He was not buried in this tomb. But I show this because it really paints a great visual picture of where he was buried, right? He was actually buried, of course, in Jerusalem. What we're seeing here is a burial site that is still in existence today. It's still there. We drove past it. You can see the guardrail, in fact, to the highway that passes by. But we stop here with our travelers and our guests because what you're seeing is exactly the rock-cut tomb, and that's what they were called back then, a rock-cut tomb, a tomb cut inside a rock. You're seeing the rock-cut tomb that Jesus, the kind of rock-cut tomb that Jesus would have been buried in there in Jerusalem. What do we see here, right? So two things. Here's the tomb, and what's this? Right? There's the wheel. Right? We've all heard the story of he's placed inside the tomb and then the wheel is rolled in front of the tomb to close the tomb. Here's the tomb. Here's the wheel. Stonework. That is still there today. We go see that just so folks can get an idea of where Jesus was actually, where he was, the type of tomb he was buried in. This is inside that tomb. Because what they actually did back then was they would bury them, and then as the body decayed, they would then move them to another smaller portion of the rock-cut tomb to make room for the next body. While we're in Jerusalem, we go see the Western Wall. So the Western Wall, which used to be called the Wailing Wall, it's not called the Wailing Wall. The Jewish people do not call it the Wailing Wall anymore because they can pray there. They're allowed to go back and pray at the Western Wall. So it's called the Western Wall. Used to be. We've heard it certainly referred to many times as the Wailing Wall, but it's no longer called that by the Jewish people because they can pray at the Western Wall. What surprised me about the Western Wall was, I guess it's like the Jordan River. I was expecting something much bigger. I was expecting to see the Western Wall being a bigger area. What's left of the Western Wall.
It's called the Wailing Wall, isn't it?
Yeah, it was, but it's now really the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall, same thing. The Western Wall, what's left of it though, is probably about the size, maybe a football field, maybe. And what you actually see here is, so here's the Western Wall, here's the Dome of the Rock, which would have been the site of the first and second temple, right? They would have been right there. But this is what's left of the remaining open portion of the Western Wall itself, about the size of a football field. This side is for the men, and this side is for the ladies. So even that is separated by a little divider, and the men on one side, and the ladies on the other. And then, of course, this was fun, though. It was fascinating, because here, of course, we get a chance to see the Western Wall. We go and place our prayer notes inside the wall, right? You write them on a little piece of paper, and you stick them in the Western Wall. Did you do that when you went? Did you do that when you went? Yeah, there we go.
They segregated the men and the women.
That's exactly right. The fun thing is, what we do is, on most of our tours, is we like to take our folks, in addition to just seeing the Western Wall, we like to take our folks on a tour of what they call the tunnel tour. And we meet right here as a group, right here at the corner, we meet as a group, and we take you down about 3 stories under the city of Jerusalem, and we walk the next 1,000 feet underground along the Western Wall, 30 feet below the city. Because what you're seeing 30 feet below the city is really the original portions of the Western Wall put there 2,000 years ago. Over 2,000 years, and you can see it just in this picture, the kinds of rock change over the many, many, many millennia, right, over the centuries, not millennia, over the centuries. So when you're down 30 feet, you're seeing the original portions of the Western Wall. What blew us away was, once again, how did they do this? Because this kid is standing in front of a section of the Western Wall that's perfectly cut and the size of a train car. You stand there like that kid and you ask yourself, how in the world did they get this rock the size of a train car, not only perfectly laser cut, but how did they get it in place? How'd they do it? With God's help is the answer, I'm guessing, right? Because it's an amazing thing to see. This is back inside the church. This is the crucifixion site. This is station 11. Very impressive. So we're now back inside the church. We're going to see the stone of anointing. You can see folks getting a chance to touch this. This, of course, is where the body would have been cleansed after the death of Jesus, right? This is the stone, the place where Jesus would have been cleansed. There's no more iconic visualized picture in the world, I don't think, than that one. The Last Supper. I mean, this is the world's most iconic picture that you've ever seen. So once again, for any of us traveling to get this opportunity to stand on the spot where the Last Supper took place, how do you forget that? That's an amazing, powerful day. This picture, once again, taken from the Garden of Gethsemane, Mount of Olives, looking across into Jerusalem. But in the Kidron Valley, it's also a Jewish burial site. It's been there for over 3,000 years. Over 500,000 Jewish people are buried along the eastern wall. 500,000. And the owner of the company has told me with enough money, you can still get prime location near the gate. With enough money. We generally take our folks to, and this really kind of changes the mood and atmosphere and experience a bit, but it's a fascinating, important day. We generally take most of our folks on tour to the Yad Vashem, which is the Jewish Holocaust Museum. So, because I think it too is a very important story, right? Because at the Yad Vashem, at this museum, you know, it pays really homage to the 6 million Jewish people that were killed in World War II, in the Holocaust. And that too was a very, very powerful day. Very moving. And funny enough, in our entire journey through Israel, where we saw the most soldiers was at the memorial. Why? Because that's where they would send the new recruits, the 18-year-olds, the 19-year-olds, without their weapons, to learn about their own country's history. Because they know how important this is, that the younger generation know this too. So when we were there were just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of young Jewish Israeli soldiers, men and women, at the memorial with us that day. They're to learn about their own country's sad history. One thing I did find interesting that day was there's a train car that one of the many train cars that would have carried those Jewish people to their deaths. And that train car sits at the end of this train trestle. And I just, for whatever reason, I found that particular scene to be very moving. Because you could just once again kind of picture this sad experience. Who was in that train and where they were headed. So it's quite a thing. So it's a powerful day for sure. While we're in Jerusalem, we're going to go see the Shrine of the Book. You know, a few minutes ago I talked about the city of Qumran, right? Qumran, where they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? The cave and the kid and the leather and the shoes and all that stuff, right? So we talked about where they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. What we're about to do now on tour is, and we're back in Jerusalem, we're now about to go back and see the museum that they call the Shrine of the Book, where they actually keep the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's where they're actually housed. So we learned about them a couple of days earlier. Now we go to the museum to actually see them on display. And it's on display here inside this museum. What you're seeing here, the reason for this particular picture is, when I talked about Qumran, what did I say? I said this kid found 4 vessels, right? 4 jars with lids on them, right? This represents the lid of those jars. That's what this is meant to represent. This shape is the lid of a jar. And that jar are those 4 jars he found. We wrap up our trip, and you've almost made it through Israel with us, so you've done well. You've done well today. We're almost finished. So we began our story by seeing Nazareth, where, of course, you know, Mary is told by the angel that she'll give birth to the Messiah. We jumped fast forward to the end of Jesus' life, there for the 14 stations of Christ at the burial site. We wrap up our tour by beginning the story once again, by going to Bethlehem. Bethlehem itself, a city that's about 20 minutes outside Jerusalem. Bethlehem is a Palestinian-held city. Palestinian-held city. Up until last year, the Jewish people were not allowed in Bethlehem. The owner of our company, Boaz Shelgi, Jewish, right up until last year, was not allowed to go into the city with us that day. He would send us from the hotel to Bethlehem. When we arrive in Bethlehem, we would then be greeted by our Arab tour guide, who was a good friend of his. And he then would take us on a tour of Bethlehem and then back to the hotel. A year ago, things got better. If you look at Facebook a year ago, you will see a picture of Boaz Shelgi with the biggest smile on his face that you've ever seen, because a year ago, Palestinians and the Israelis agreed that tour guides and the tour guide bus company drivers could actually and are welcome to come to Bethlehem. So today, as a traveler, he goes with us when we go to Bethlehem. That was a big day. That was a big day. Exciting day. And you'll see that picture of him in Bethlehem that day. It had been 16 years since he had stepped foot in Bethlehem. Today, he goes with us on every tour. So, well, why are we there, though? Right? Why are we there? We're there because the story starts in Bethlehem. It's a must-see. You have to go see and experience Bethlehem. So in Bethlehem, we are seeing the Church of the Nativity. In Jerusalem, just to back up for a second, in Jerusalem, we were seeing the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Right? That's the burial site, the crucifixion site. That took place more or less on the grounds of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The Church of the Nativity, built 300 years after Jesus, the Church of the Nativity was the site of Jesus' birth. So a very important place. So here's what happens. So we go to Bethlehem, and we're about to go see the birthplace of Jesus. I don't know about you, but myself and most of us on the trip, and I think maybe even the priest a little bit, when we were kind of imagining the manger scene, what do we picture? We picture an outdoor manger, right? We're imagining kind of a stable, the animals gathered around, Mary's giving birth to Jesus in a manger, an outdoor manger. That's what I pictured it to be. That's what most of us probably kind of imagined it to be. Jesus was born in a cave, and we're about to go see and touch and experience that spot. We go inside the Church of Holy Sepulchre. We'll come back to this picture because I want to talk a little bit more about that. But we walk inside the church. This is inside the church, right? We walk inside the Church of the Nativity. We meet. You can see all the tour groups. This lady was part of our group. We all meet as a group right here behind that pillar. Because what we're about to do, and you can see it in this picture, what we're about to do is meet as a group and walk down about 3 stories into the cave that Jesus was born in. The cave. The funny thing is, when you leave the church and you walk through the gift shop, like you're at Disney, when you leave and walk through that gift shop, the gift shop has 2 versions of the nativity scene for sale. You can buy the Western version that I had under my tree for the past 50 years, or you can buy the accurate version, which looks more like a cave. So just as an FYI, when you're leaving, make sure you buy the one that's the true version. It looks like a cave. But you walk inside the church, you walk down about 3 stories down this stone staircase into the cave that Jesus was born in. We stood in what would have been the manger, because they would bring the animals inside at night to protect them from wild animals. They would bring the animals inside. We stood in the spot that would have been the manger, but we also saw the spot where Jesus was born. So we back up to this picture. See this right here, the Star of Bethlehem. So you walk down into the cave. You walk up to that spot, the Star of Bethlehem. You kneel down. You place your hand inside that hole, and you touch the spot, touch the rock that Jesus was born at. that too, just like the 14 Stations of Christ, that was a moving moment. I watched many people that day that quite frankly couldn't move. This was so important to them. They were touching the spot of Jesus' birth. They couldn't move. They literally had to be picked up and moved away so that others could get that experience. So, for me, for you, for the folks that go with us, this is what this trip's all about. It's that moment, quite frankly. It's that moment. And it's a moment that you'll never forget, and I certainly won't. So, this is how we kind of wrap up our trip generally, is with visiting Bethlehem, seeing the city. Bethlehem being Palestinian, we didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what to expect. What I found in Bethlehem, almost surprising in the sense that it turned out to be a city where I found probably the folks went above and beyond the call of being friendly. The Palestinians and the locals and the Arabs and the Muslims. Because I think they wanted to show simply that people are people, right? At the end of the day, we actually can and do get along. We don't hate everybody. And we found the folks in Bethlehem, in Jericho, in Jerusalem, in Cana, to be friendly, caring, warm. And I think that really added to this entire experience of it being such a wonderful trip for us. And it's something that you've experienced, and they came back and said, yep, we really loved it. So, there we are. So anyway, so that's about it. So, the flyer that you've got, the flyer that you have, kind of highlights the dates, gives you a basic itinerary, what we went through today. If you're interested in going, then my suggestions would be let Jean know, let Amanda know, let Kathy know, and then they can take it from there and start getting you booked and be part of Jean's trip. So
Everybody should go.
everybody should go, right? There we go. Thanks a lot, Mom. I appreciate it. Thank you. Jean, anything else you want to wrap up and say? It's all yours. Now, if you want to wrap it up, it's all yours.
Just want to say that it is so exciting to think about all this wonderful information that we have, and we'd love to have you come on our trip next year to Israel. You know, I kind of think I can picture myself there at that Western Wall sounding the shofar. Yeah. And so we'd love to have you come along and join us as we hear. Maybe that's the time the Lord will return at that moment. We don't know, because the Bible says that the Lord will come with the sound of the trumpet. And so I would love to, and I want to close with this, and then I'll turn it back over to Wow. Shalom, Baruch Hashem.